Hi, I am Joshua William Gelb.
Hi, I'm Normandy Sherwood.
And we are part of the creative team of Nosferatu, a 3D symphony of horror, performing at Skirball, or performing via Skirball this Halloween. It is a presentation and a commission of my company, Theater in Quarantine, which was established during the pandemic out of my closet. And we're actually going to be performing it from this very closet and live streaming it to YouTube 10 times, 2 times a night to your phone in live 3D.
I am very excited to be working on this project. Josh and I have worked together before on a show many years ago called The Black Crook. I costumed that show, and I was very excited to join this team working on a scary Halloween show and thinking a lot about the stuff, the costumes, the props, and the different images. So, and I'm thinking about 3D, that's been new to me. I mean, I work in 3D all the time, but 3D with 3D glasses, that's been a new thing.
I think this type of 3D is new to everyone. I mean, it's new, but it's very, very old. I guess I'm going to sometimes talk to you, the lens, but I'm also going to talk to you,
the person.
The person. But you know this because you're working on this.
Yeah, but it's good to hear again.
Sure. We use anaglyph 3D, which is basically one of the oldest 3D technologies there is. It is as old as photography, and basically we've sort of taken this mode of 3D. It's the red and blue glasses. You're familiar with like the cardboard cliche. They're right over there.
These guys.
Yeah. Basically these, we tint one eye red, one eye blue. We have 2 cameras. We tint one of those blue and one of those red, and then we trick your eyes into believing that our cameras are your eyes, and thus you experience depth. But this has been around since the 1880s, 90s. Like earliest film cameras, they were experimenting with 3D. And it just so happens that using this very specific video software, Isadora, that I use, I was able to realize that I could actually replicate this system in the sort of digital space that I've been working in for the past 3 years.
Yeah, so I guess one thing that Josh alluded to earlier is the space that we're working in, which is in Josh's apartment, is a theater built into a closet that is 4 by 8 by 2. And part of the fun challenge of the 3D is like using the sort of depth illusion to create these extremely deep seeming scenes. Like those stereographic?
Yeah, stereoscopic.
Stereoscopic glasses, which maybe some people are familiar with. They're like glasses that you put on and you have a card that has 2 images and you get this amazing illusion of depth. I guess that's one of those early 3D technologies you were talking about.
Yeah.
And
like stereopticons too, which I have somewhere.
But yeah, in like a 2 foot, slightly 2 foot plus space, creating the illusion of like many feet, maybe hundreds of feet of depth. Hopefully.
I guess though we should explain the space a little bit, right? Because welcome to my apartment. It's a bit of a mess right now because we are in the thick of tech. But this theater is, as Normandy mentioned, it's my closet. During the early days of the COVID pandemic, when the shutdown occurred, I converted my closet into a digital performance venue. And for a solid 1.5 years, I worked with up to 100 different artists and remote collaborators, particularly my co-creative director at the time, Katie Rose McLaughlin, and we built out an array of been 24 different evenings of digital live performance, basically in opposition to a lot of the Zoom theater that was going on at the time. We were trying to figure out how we could make a digital theater that actually felt like it was embracing the technology and utilizing it on its own terms, and really embracing the concept of the theatrical. So even though it's a remarkably small, very shallow space, we were sort of able to play with a lot of different tricks of camera orientation, tricks of multiplicity, tricks with time looping, and all these like different ways we could play with theatrical ideas that are very particular to the digital. And moreover, we were able to, I don't know, try and like really perceive the power of limitation, right? And understanding like how within a very small amount of space you can actually conceive of a lot of depth, both metaphorical and literal, in this case.
And I think so what is so key to me about theater in quarantine and specific about what it does different from other sorts of digital performances, your emphasis on liveness. Mm-hmm. And so, though some of the tools that we're using may seem like film tools, this is a piece of live theater that we're creating, and that's what Josh has been creating for, since he began this, is how do you, when you can't be live in person, was the original sort of challenge was when you can't be live in person, how do you do a live performance? Yeah. And so now we're in a moment where we can be live in person, but we're still sort of thinking through, like, with this technology, like what is liveness through the digital, and like how do we play with the impossibility of conveying liveness through a medium that is like, it is mediated. It is hard to tell when things are live.
So there's like actually a confluence of, I think, two different experiments with liveness going on here. The first being that, and obviously that's where the 3D idea came from. How can we really perceive like the shape of the body through a digital screen? And 3D was obviously the answer. And so this has been a real challenge into like, how can we create an interesting use of the technology? And simultaneously, there's this other digital experiment, which is, what does it mean to make digital performance now that theater has reopened? Now we sort of lucked into this relationship with Skirball, or this particular slot. It came about when I was talking to Jay Wegman about some of the 3D work I was doing, and Jay mentioned that the Skirball building is closed on Halloween because of the village parade, the Halloween parade, and it's on the route to the park, and Jay loves holiday programming. What artistic director doesn't love holiday programming? And this suddenly felt like a really exciting opportunity to utilize the digital work that I've been doing and actually conceive of a slot that didn't exist. And so we are making this Halloween show, this adaptation of the 1922 film Nosferatu, as a sort of mode of exploring not just the 3D, but also how do we make digital performance now? Why do we make digital performance now? And is there a way to push these experiments further? The further we get away from the pandemic.
Right, and one of the things, I'll say that, I find so, I want to say, fun to turn over in my mind, or funny or something, is that it's a lot of this technology of creating the ability to do live 3D streaming. It seems like, Josh, you're on the cutting edge of streaming live 3D. As far as I know.
Maybe. I mean, 3D is a funny word, because I think, when you think in the more traditional, common parlance of 3D right now, you think VR, like a VR headset, and that I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
That's quite common.
But
this
doing it for these is less common. And what's funny to me and what I one of the things that drew me into the project is like, well, we see stuff live in 3D all the time. That's walking through the world. But so it's just really interesting to me, like, so this challenge of like creating this extra layer of artifice and like what, I don't know, like when you add that constraint, when you add that artifice, what are you able to see? Like I'm curious, like what's the value of like this kind of like complex technique that is beautiful but also like not necessary or something?
Well, artifice is a really good word, right? I also like to use theatrical, and in some ways they're interchangeable, in some ways they're not. But that's always been the mission of the closet, right? How can it be a theatrical space and not a purely cinematic space? How can we treat it like, a black box or a white box theater, right? Which means that it can be a more artificial space. It doesn't have to be a literal space as in the cinematic frequently is. So actually I'll like jump back to the way beginning of the conceit, right? Which is that my closet is basically the same aspect ratio as an iPhone. And so the original idea was always like, oh, I can make it for like live, Instagram Live. I don't know if I was on TikTok at the time, but TikTok Live, right? And that's where it was originally aiming for. Of course, YouTube being the more prominent channel, at least in my mind at the time, or platform, I started doing work there, and it immediately became more landscape-based. That being said, what's so great about the closet is it emphasizes the full body, like a stage, like a digital proscenium. So, in that respect, it's always been about perceiving the whole body. It's always been about exploring the artificial on camera. And it's always been about these like feats of liveness. Like, how elaborate can we construct? We laugh because we are really getting elaborate with this one. But like, how can we create these like elaborate obstacle courses that are, sometimes perceived by the audience and sometimes not perceived by the audience? Some of it's a little conceptual in that, I just like to push the feeling of liveness as much as possible. And in fact, I talk a lot about Willy Wonka. The moment in Willy Wonka when he pulls Mike TV out of the little shrinker, out of the TV, right? I haven't seen it in a while, and that it's such a tactile experience. You literally reach into the screen and pull out the full person, and that's what I've always wanted theater in quarantine to feel like. You should be able to reach into the screen and pull me out, and so with the 3D. We are literally doing that.
Closer and closer, yeah.
So in some ways, like 3 years later after the original conceit, we are finally building a show for a phone. And I think that's worth emphasizing. We have made this to be viewed on your phone, in your home.
Alone, if possible. In the dark.
In the dark. And truly, like, these performers will actually like jump out at you and be like extremely dimensional.
And to me, like, that's such an exciting possibility because it's like the re-enchantment of the phone, right? Like your phone is so, it's your tether, it's your boss, it's your lover sometimes, it's like the phone is with you all the time, and it's kind of like carving up your time in a particular way. And so one of the things about this project that I got really excited about was like, what is the possibility of like positing a different relationship with the phone, or having the phone kind of become something other than what it normally is. And so I suppose that's ambitious, but I think that that's what we're hoping having this live 3D experience with your phone alone in the dark might be able to give you.
Yeah, and it kind of in the opposite senses of VR, but like, our relationship to our phones, I'm realizing like I've been painting with black paint and I'm like, look filthy right now. But our relationship...
Hard work. Just hard work.
Just hard work. But our relationships to our screen, it's such a flat experience, and And with the 3D and we're also utilizing binaural audio, we're trying to create an exceptionally immersive one. Like, what does it mean for this, like, again, proscenium space to actually open up into your own home? So that is the exciting possibility. It's daunting, and getting the 3D to work has been a daunting process, but really exciting. And then, like, on top of it all, we kind of like throw in the nostalgia of the horror genre itself, and this, like, especially canon, horror canon movie, Nosferatu, which, like, invents so many tropes, not just of vampire lore, but of horror, cinema horror in general.
Yeah. Right, I'm thinking about the sort of, like, reach back to this sort of, like, classic horror, and also sort of, like, promise of, like, radio and early TV, of, like, bringing the entertainment into your home, which, like, now we kind of take for granted that the entertainment or whatever, the media is with us, like, everywhere and in every possible space. But, like, I think also just pointing to it's like you are bringing this into your home, and it's like the promise of what does it mean to, like, bring an entertainment, a specific thing back into your space, I think is something we're really interested in.
Oh, yeah. Well, liveness as a concept, I first read about in the writing of Philip Auslander, who wrote a book called Liveness. And I love, he kind of, like, delineates the origin point of the term itself as coming from radio. And very specifically, like, the moment something gets played where you can no longer tell if it's being performed live or not. Prior to that point, even with the phonograph, you were literally putting on the record, so you knew it wasn't live. But with radio, suddenly there's a blur between the pre-recorded and the simultaneous and synchronous. So yeah, I think a lot about radio and early television, and early film, like Nosferatu, for instance, right? Which are deeply indebted to theater artists, because that's that was the primacy. What am I looking for? The, like, form of the time.
Well, the language of performing, I guess.
Exactly. And so you have, like, early cinema, you can see these old silent movies, and you're seeing these, like, broad melodramatic theatrical gestures, and very stagnant cameras because they were too big and they didn't know how to move them yet. And, like, so you're watching theater on screen, and then similarly, like, the invention of the 3-camera sitcom is, like, built to literally evoke what it means to be watching a stage show in the audience. And so, yeah, I feel like that's been my entrance point into a lot of the digital work, is, like, how can we as theater artists find our way into something that might be different than the way, say, someone who's just grown up really knowing film does. But yeah, to me, it's also this element of liveness that's so much part of it. Anyway, I went on a liveness digression, which I love to do.
It's very useful. I guess we should maybe talk about Nosferatu. Right?
Sure.
That's the show. It is Nosferatu, a 3D symphony of horror, and we are. I'm trying to think, like, what's our relationship to Nosferatu, the film? How would you characterize that?
Well, Nosferatu is just sort of an iconic, vaguely expressionistic silent movie. Directed by F.W. Murnau, with featuring, like, a particularly disturbing performance by Max Schreck as the vampire Count Orlok. The whole thing, of course, is like an unauthorized plagiarism of Dracula.
Pretty explicitly.
Yeah, true. They got like deeply sued, and, like, all the prints almost got pulled, and I think, like, one survived, and that's why we have it. So, yeah, I mean, obviously this is a Halloween show, so Jay asked for vampires, and we went Nosferatu. And I think in that respect, it's because, like, my attraction to the story is particularly that that really deranged performance by Max Schreck, right? He's like, vampires have been so co-opted by like the Twilight of it all and the Interview with the Vampire. It's like your Bela Lugosi has become like Brad Pitt,
right? Sexy vampires. That's pretty much what we've got.
And obviously, you know, yeah, Bela Lugosi is a good example. Aristocratic, debonair, you know, mischievously foreign, and like vaguely homoerotic, and like that's all, you know, well and good, but what's great about Nosferatu is that it's pure animalism. It's something entirely different. It is like a very, there is no facade. There is just the like decaying soul. And again, these like purely expressionistic shadow gestures that are so beautiful and evocative, and you know, I don't know if I love the rest of the movie, but I love that performance so much.
Yeah, there are a lot of really striking images, and like I guess they're the kind of images that have so seeped into film that they feel quite familiar. Like, you know, I think the classic one is of course like the shadow of the hand creeping, like we've seen the shadow of the Nosferatu hand like creeping over the wall or like creeping over a bed. Like I feel like that is an image that is in a lot of people's minds already, and so like kind of going back to an origin point for some of those images, or sort of at least an initial popularizing point, and thinking about, I don't know, like what is fun to play with in terms of the tropes that are really familiar, and like what are different ways that we can turn them more, and that has been part of the fun, is like looking at Nosferatu, but also like looking around the edges and sort of thinking about what Nosferatu is to us, and like so more than just like a reenactment of Nosferatu, I think we're trying to play with what it is to have that film object and that story, and like what it can do to people, maybe.
Yeah, and in a way it's a distillation of the film, which is, you know, rather epic in scope. And, you know, we have 3 actors in a closet, and so we're trying to like really play with how it's only what, 30 minutes, right? So how can we like really distill it? How can we break it down to its most basic parts, and also really indulge in the practical effects of it all, right? Which were all practical, of course, in the original movie too. So how can we build all of, you know, we have, so you're missing one of our principal collaborators, which is Nick Lehane, who is performing in the piece and also co-creating it with us. And Nick is a phenomenal puppeteer and puppet mind, and so has been like spearheading our use of shadow. And so yeah, just like enjoying, like, how can we cram Hollywood into this space, I guess, or, you know, the German equivalent at the time.
Yeah, I mean, like, so the challenge of like, how do you make this very limited space feel full and then empty, like moving between those kind of looks or feelings with the constraint of the space, I think has been part of what the motivation or the impetus or something for me, like what, and also I'll say like one thing that is, interests me about the film Nosferatu that I think is like not directly in what we've been doing so far, but is sort of like hovering over it, I would say, is the fact that like that film was shot on location in a bunch of places, so like there is very beautiful footage of like very realistic seeming Eastern European villages and like mountain vistas, and so there's something about like how do you cram the sort of fullness of the landscapes in that film into a really small space, or like what are you
that has no vistas.
So like how are we making vistas in a space that is like the size of a refrigerator?
We should make a vista today.
Yeah, make some more vistas.
And you know, there's, I mean, obviously, like the horror of it all. I think it's we've talked a bit about like what it means to try and scare an audience, and if it's possible in the first place, as theater artists, and it's something really, but really it's an interesting challenge, and in order to like actually create a sense of terror, is in some ways like the greatest challenge for any theater artist. I can't remember the last time I actually jumped in my seat in a live performance. So there's something obviously that's like really exciting to indulge in there, as well as sort of clocking the trajectory of the history of horror performance, from this like much more bombastic, expressionist style, that obviously Murnau is part of, and you know Dr. Caligari is part of, and all of these like wonderful old horror movies, to like what is scary now. And there's a lot that's scary now, but like what is scary in performance now, or you know how we view the uncanny and the uneasy, in a performative setting.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting to think about like what if to reconstruct in our minds like what is the horror of the film as it is, and sort of how do we want to play with that in the piece that we're making, because to watch it doesn't seem that horrifying, and yet
Not anymore.
And so like thinking about like, well, what was the thing that was so uncanny or so unsettling, or that Murnau was trying to get at to scare, or how did scaring work at the time, and thinking about like in the arc of this piece, like as you're saying, like moving from thinking about a more 1922 sense of horror, and how does that move into a more contemporary sense of horror.
And I think that's in some ways the trajectory of the piece we're making, right? Like we're starting with this very pastiche silent movie approach, and then sort of like chipping away at that until you'll see. Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, that right. So is live streaming the undead in some way, or like what does the yeah? Well, that's a really great question that I feel like we have not thought about enough.
Maybe we haven't thought about that enough. I mean, I texted our sound designer last night 2 words, psychic infiltration. And then I think I amended it to psychic penetration, which is gross. But also maybe more apropos of like the fangs piercing the skin of a vampire, right? And so yeah, in some respects there's something like vampires, the trope of the vampire being omnipotent, living forever, right? You can live forever. There's a sort of telekinesis that they're capable of. They can transform into any animal, into mists, into fogs. And so in that respect, thinking about your phone in a way, and our my addiction to my phone kind of feels in many ways like the vampire, our vampire equivalent. And I mean, I don't know if we try to say that that's the story, but in some ways I think that's the story, in terms of the way that our attention has been monopolized, by these objects. But a vampire, aliveness in the vampire.
Well, so I'm sketching this out of my mind. Like the thing about the vampire is that it will never die, but it is not alive. So it's like somewhere in between, and what mortals have that it is jealous of potentially is aliveness. Like, so, what is the thing that is jealous of your aliveness? The vampire, but what else, Josh?
Well, okay, so the vampire is the undead, yes. Liveness, in some ways, like, also lives at this, like, crux of not quite being live and not quite being not live. in a way. Like, I talked a lot, in as much as the vampire is both dead and alive, right? They are just the undead. I talked a lot in the early days about, like, how do you convince an audience that you're live? How? What are the tools at our disposal here? And we used the word liveness a lot, less to actually insist that we were performing live. We were performing live, but like the conceit itself as a way of conveying that we are performing live.
Right. So like the artifice of liveness, and I mean, it's like the kind of thing with theater where it's like sometimes you're like, oh, we want to show the audience the scenes, the big mess backstage or whatever, but it's like you have to stage the mess because the actual mess doesn't look like anything. So it's like the artificing of the thing to make it seem authentic enough. So you need to like have, I mean, what are your like liveness triggers that you would use to convince?
Well, I mean, clearly, like, yeah, showing the behind the scenes, obviously, time codes. I would put a little unedited version of The Closet in the corner of shows so that you could watch, like, oh, this is what's really happening, and this is what's the sort of more elaborate stage production. And then, of course, glitching, failure. Like, that, unfortunately, is what I learned, to my great humiliation, was the one thing that immediately made everyone go, this is happening live. This is theater.
Right.
Is when things went wrong. You can try and fake that, but it doesn't quite work.
It doesn't.
So yeah, no, I definitely the glitch is essential.
Right. I mean, it's making me think about like, so an analog I'm thinking of is like when you play, if you're playing like electronic based music or you're playing like an instrument that is largely electronic, whether it's like on a laptop or like on a synthesizer, what comes out is not necessarily distinguishable as live because it's coming out of a PA. And so it's like similar to this, like musicians often have to like figure out like what's the way it's going to appear live enough, or like, is there a way to make it appear live enough that it's worth actually playing it live?
Right.
Rather than just playing a recording.
And sometimes I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes, again, there's a bit of a conceptual high wire act going on here, where sometimes it's almost about convincing myself that it's live, and that it's as live as I can possibly make it. I think a funny thing about the tactility of The Closet, which I kind of insist upon being like really an essential force, the tactility and presence of the body. I find so often that when people watch the work, they don't, versus when they see me work in person, they realize that like how much I'm sweating, how much I'm like throwing myself against these walls. That sort of thing just doesn't seem to translate through the screen. All of which is to say, this is, I feel nocturnal, and this is like a horrifying coffin. So I guess I've just become a vampire. Just trying to tie it all back together. There we go.
Well, okay, one other like loose thread though I want to think about is, so a long time ago I had a roommate who, I was doing lots of theater at the time, and I would always want her to come see my shows, and she was always a little bit hesitant. And finally I was like, well, why don't you ever want to come see theater? And she said, it's just that if I'm seeing a show, I'm like witnessing it, and if someone messes up, I have to be embarrassed for them, and I can't handle that. I would rather go to a movie where I can just leave and no one will know. And so I always, like with any performance, I'm always thinking about that comment, like there's something about like the potential for failure and embarrassment that makes theater theater.
Yes.
And so yeah, like what does that have to do when you aren't actually necessarily feeling like you're witnessing the embarrassment or the failure because there's that screen.
Well, and that's where it's easier to draw like connections to circus and sports, right? Because like we trust the liveness and the way they're shot, like they are feats of liveness,
right?
And I think that transcend the capture. And I guess that always is what I'm aiming towards, is like, what is the feat of liveness in theater that can transcend the capture? It may not be possible, but it is still nonetheless, like, it is the goal.
Yeah, another thing I'll say, that a part of what really draws me to theater in quarantine is that you are really interested in things that are on the edge of being possible, or maybe not possible, and that is what I like also.
Which, exactly, well, and is where monsters live, of course. I mean, I'm thinking about The Undead. I'm also thinking about Psychic Self-Defense, your amazing piece.
A show that I just did that was at Here Arts Center in September.
And thinking about, like, objects, in a way, and the manipulation of objects, puppetry, like, how there's sort of a connection there to vampirism in a weird way, that I'm also just attracted to, and especially attracted to in your work.
Wait, explain that more. Like, what's
Okay.
what's the vampirism connection between that and manipulating objects? Or,
Well, to me, there's a sort of, like, a vampire is as much an object as it is a person at a certain point, right? It's bloodless. It is lifeless. That is both what is attractive and beautiful in it. And I think a really good puppet, or like a really good, like, so your piece, of course, it was seemingly an infinite amount of curtains with a lot of personality. Like, in many ways, that really sits in the uncanny to me, in ways that are very similar to the vampire.
right, and I guess it's like a vampire is uncanny because it seems sort of humanish, but is not human. Like, definitionally, it stopped being human. And the thing that's scary about it is the ways in which it can trick you into thinking it is live and alive.
Or, like we like to say, we are tricking you into believing that this show has depth.
That's good.
Any other questions?
While we are not necessarily portraying like the sexy vampire of recent years, I think that there's something about like the vampire wanting, the young couple wanting both of them, and like whatever wanting means for a vampire. It often
wanting to, have them
and absorb them.
Yes.
And so in that way, I mean, I think that we're thinking about like, what does that mean with the horror of something wanting to absorb you?
We talk about like monsters, right? We talk about what we're afraid of, or what cultures are afraid of, and the vampire so often it sits at like the epicenter of panic around sex. In addition to fear of foreigners and Jews, of course. But Nosferatu very specifically in that instance. But yeah, it is so about our hang-ups around queerness and around promiscuity, and so yeah, in that respect, yeah, we're always running away from the fear of being penetrated, right?
And I think that it's like, one thing that I'm interested in is, so there's a trope of the vampire being so powerful, and its power is to queer you. Its power is to take you over. And I think...
And turn you into one of them.
Turn you into one of them, right?
One of us.
And I think that, like, I don't exactly know where this goes, but there's something about this vision of Orlok that's beginning to emerge that is... It's like we have questions about the power of the vampire, or there's something about the vampire that is different from the sort of like that powerful villain thing. I hope you share this idea, but that there's something sort of like scared and sweet about this vampire, and that we kind of, it's still scary actually to be confronted by something that is scared and sweet. You know, that it doesn't diminish the fact that it's frightening, but it's the danger of it is located a little bit differently and is perhaps a bit more like abject or vulnerable or something.
Someone's here. Probably Nick. Can I buzz someone in for a second? So I don't...
Oh good, Nick will come up and we can answer the last question with all three of us. Yeah.
I got a little bit here though on this, which... Are we still going?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I think what's so fascinating about Orlok as a character, and Orlok will suck your blood. Absolutely. But again, there's something so fascinating about the fact that there is no facade to Orlok. Orlok is Orlok. Like the Bram Stoker movie does so much work with Gary Oldman to make him really beautiful and really ugly and really old and really young, and it's all about like misdirection and transformation, whereas Orlok is simply himself.
That's true. Orlok does not transform. Yeah. That is a specific thing to Nosferatu. We might get the sense that, are there animal transformations in the film?
They're evoked but never seen, really.
But Orlok is as Orlok is from the beginning to the ending of the film.
Yeah, exactly, and that's sort of the attraction of the character. Okay. We have people arriving, we're about to start rehearsal. But yeah, that's in some ways like, what is... Maddie, could you just... thank you. Yeah, that's what's sort of attractive about... He is equal parts attractive and repulsive, just existing. We talked a lot about current horror tropes, where like the rule is never see the monster, right? Like you get 1 minute of seeing the monster in your last act, and Nosferatu just defies that logic.
Right, you see the monster the whole time.
Yeah, yeah,
and like doing regular things too, and weird things in a regular way,
and very silly things.
Yeah.
Also, so it's there's a disconnect there, but there's also something really palpably interesting about how openly vampire Orlok is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that speaks to the closet for any specific metaphor, but I will say there's something really wonderful, wonderfully scary for me at least, about like bringing so many people into this performance space.
Mm-hmm.
And by people I mean the team, the creative team.
Humans.
Humans into this performance space that is my home, that for so many years was a very isolated...
Was your tomb.
Was like a tomb, yeah.
But now,
and
brought everyone home with you.
Taking you with me. But there is something interesting about like obviously this cultural moment where pandemic precautions have diminished to a large extent, but at the same time there's a lot of unease around how we move forward and why we move forward and should we move forward, and I think this apartment feels like it's the epicenter for a lot of that crisis for me on a very personal level.
It's interesting. So like I for many years worked with a collaborative theater company called the National Theater of the United States of America, and we did everything together theatrically in that our roles were very hybrid. We were constantly working together. We were constantly like sharing departments and stuff like that. And I haven't really worked exactly in that way for many years since that company ended. And so this is actually an interesting return to like that kind of collaborative intimacy where you are working closely with a couple of other artists who you have a different, you see differently because you're different people.
Yeah.
You have a lot of respect for each other, and you're trying to kind of like understand what is the thing that only the three of us can make, or actually plus all of the other people who have been brought into the process. So like, what is the thing only the six of us can make? Like,
Right.
and that is, it's been a nice for me to return to that. I haven't really been in that mindset in a number of years, and it's sort of like, I'm thinking about like the pandemic and the way that it's like you kind of, for years, couldn't even do that. Like, you couldn't have the kind of physically close collaboration, but like you couldn't build new collaborations in the same way. It was hard to be in new groups if the groups were only meeting on Zoom, for instance. And so there's something very sweet about this moment of being able to form new collaborations or new collaborative relationships in the sort of more intimate, like horizontal, experimental way that we've been doing.
Yeah. This is such a microscopic space, literally and figuratively. And so there is something really palpable about like bringing people together here. Bus noise. Bringing people together and like seeing the sort of explosive results, right? Like theater in quarantine's always been about actually having a very short timeline, making short form work. These are things that are kind of anathema to theater these days, which, you know, is all about like longer development, in both the good and the bad sense, and short form has sort of fallen away entirely, and so it's really this extreme intimate process, having us all together. It's a very small group because we can only fit so many of us. I think it's only a team of 8 in total, and just kind of like seeing the results of a couple weeks' work. And so we're trying to like keep that practice in place even on a show like this, and which means we are nearly there. Yeah.
Couple
weeks. Exactly 1 week, I think.
Exactly 1 week?
Yeah, we open next Thursday, right? Or Friday.
Oh.
Oh wait, I should know this for this video.
We open on the 27th, whatever day that is.
It's the 27th, and whatever day today is.
Whatever day today is.
Honestly,
whatever day
don't know.
you're watching this. The show opens on the 27th of October, which is a Wednesday. No, which is a Friday?
Is it a Friday?
It is a Friday. It is a Friday.
Because we have a whole day more than I thought. That's exciting. So yes, it opens on the 27th, which is a Friday, and it runs through the 31st, which is a Tuesday, and also Halloween. And we do 2 shows a night. We do a 7 and a 9 p.m. The show's about 30 minutes, but watch it on your phone. Watch it with 3D glasses, and also with headphones, because again, like we can like truly create a very immersive experience for you, and in the dark. That being said, I just also want to say we are simul-streaming the entire thing in 2D for people who hate 3D, because we know you're out there. So that's another thing that is kind of important actually to this work in general, which is that you know, digital performance can be viewed from anywhere, literally. So the goal, of course, is to make it as accessible as possible. So even if you can't find your way to getting a pair of 3D glasses, the show is available to you.
Right. And the sound will still be 3D.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Cool.
Awesome.